In 1485, Sir Thomas Malory's book, Le Morte d'Arthur, was published, telling the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's a story that has captured people's imaginations ever since. Naxos Audiobooks has now released an unabridged version of this book with the great British actor Bill Homewood as reader. It's a reading that makes both the story and the language spring to life. In this podcast, I talk with Bill about the story of Arthur, about this book, and at the very end of the podcast, you can hear him reading the very ending of the book. I'm Raymond Bisha. Welcome to the world of King Arthur. You are one of our more prolific, perhaps most prolific narrators, readers on Naxos Audiobooks. And you've just released, or just has come out, a reading of Le Morte d'Arthur, one of the first published books based on the stories of King Arthur. My question is, why do the Arthurian legends continue to have such a hold on our imaginations?
Well, I suppose I'd asked myself that question until I came to actually record the book, probably many times, because in this time when Lord of the Rings and all the Tolkien books and Avatar and other fantasy books and even the Jules Verne books venture into that sort of territory. But it's never been my bag for my own nighttime reading. But when you get stuck into King Arthur and you find within pages that Merlin crops up with his promises and his strange philosophies, and you find this sort of almost perfunctory, matter-of-fact delivery of facts like, and by nightfall 1,000 men lay dead, single sentence reductions of huge dramatic events and so on, rather as children might describe things to each other, you fall into it and you get to understand. I think that Malory pulled together scores of ancient French legends which have been partially collected in fragments, much as I think the early versions of the Bible had been assembled from fragments, and pulled them together into one long book which revolves around the life story and the death, finally, of King Arthur. Legends written in French and partially legends originally written in early English, and pulls the whole thing together into this incredible story. You sort of start to get it, and it's true that since I recorded Le Morte d'Arthur, since then, I have actually been more aware of these other things, looked at them, thought more sympathetically towards them. When they've cropped up on social media, I've dug into them and had a little look. I sort of get it now, and I never did before.
Historical accuracy, I think it's fair to say, was not his main point, although there are historical figures. But this is really an act of storytelling, isn't it?
I've had conversations like this about the Bible many times in the past, a fantastic collection of folk tales and fantasy and partial wrong history pulled together and then significance attributed to it because of philosophical bents in the listener, the reader, or whoever. Of course, this stays planted firmly in the area of fantasy. It is a bloody good story. It really is. And it's got all the ingredients that we like in a story. You know, there's violence and romance and heroism and seduction and so on. It's filled with maidens and knights and dragons and jousting and so on. You can actually flick it open if you buy the book. You can flick the book open at any page and there will very likely be a jousting fight to the death, or a seduction, or a terrible act of betrayal. It's pretty rich stuff. And yes, of course, it's great storytelling.
Do you have favorite parts or favorite things about this story that really have stuck in your mind after reading the whole thing?
I was thinking about that. It so happens, for entirely personal romantic reasons, I toured a Royal Shakespeare Company show for over about 12 or 15 years on and off, but I brought it several times to America with the Royal Shakespeare Company, called The Hollow Crown, which was put together by the great John Barton, now sadly gone from us. And he finishes The Hollow Crown with a section from Le Morte d'Arthur, which I had heard delivered by some of the greatest actors of our time on these shows, on these tours of The Hollow Crown. And it is, in fact, the actual death of Arthur. Normally, one wouldn't give this away in a podcast, but as the book is called The Death of Arthur, I don't think we're giving away any secrets. And actually, this I knew by heart. It's the section which begins, if I may just read 3 or 4 lines. Mm-hmm. Thus of Arthur, I find never more written in books that be authorized, nor more of the very certainty of his death heard I never read. Yet some men say in many parts of England that King Arthur is not dead, but had by the will of our Lord Jesu into another place. And men say that he shall come again, and he shall win the Holy Cross. I will not say that it shall be so, but rather I will say, here in this world he changed his life. But many men say that there is written upon his tomb this verse, Hic jacet Arthurus, rex quondam rexque futurus. Here lies Arthur, the once and future king. And I actually knew that speech by heart, and I knew it had come from this book. And curiously, I had completely forgotten it until I came to that section as I was recording. And it brought out goose pimples, I can tell you. It made my hair stand on end practically, because I suppose it's the show I did most in the early parts of my career. And I hadn't heard that speech all those years, but I'd heard it delivered by some of the greats of our time.
That reading was wonderful. Thank you. One last question. You studied opera and Spanish guitar at Guildhall School of Music, and you've worked in opera, theater, television, movies as a director, but you've narrated a lot of audiobooks. I think 25 or so for Naxos audiobooks. What is special about this particular medium for you?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because, of course, I'm used to audiences, and I think that is probably the underlying thrust of the question, because you're very alone in front of a microphone recording a book. I've recorded many books in studios, and I've recorded many books in all kinds of studios. So what I think I do is, if I may put it like this, rather indelicately, is I think I get into bed with the person I'm talking to. I think what I do is I decide who the writer is and make him the reader. So that, for instance, when I recorded Tom Jones for Naxos, I remember thinking that Fielding, the author, was avuncular, pleasant, and slightly amused at what he was passing across. And so that gave me the reading voice. And so I wasn't really alone. at the microphone. I was with the person on the other side of the microphone in my mind's eye, in my head, who was very close to me at that time, and I was this amused avuncular person telling the story. I think I do that with every single book, and it's always a different voice, it's always a different character. So I think what I'm doing is bringing in my work as an actor into my work as a narrator in a motivational way, and not simply in a technical way.
Here is the end of the whole book of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table, that when they were whole together there was ever 140. And here is the end of the death of Arthur. I pray you all, gentlemen and gentlewomen, that readeth this book of Arthur and his knights from the beginning to the ending, pray for me while I am alive, that God send me good deliverance. And when I am dead, I pray you all pray for my soul. For this book was ended the 9th year of the reign of King Edward IV, by Sir Thomas Malory, knight, as Jesu help him for his great might, as he is the servant of Jesu, both day and night. Thus endeth this noble and joyous book, entitled Le Morte d'Arthur. Notwithstanding, it treateth of the birth, life, and acts of the said King Arthur, of his noble knights of the Round Table, their marvellous enquests and adventures, the achieving of the Sangreal, and in the end the dolorous death and departing out of this world of them all. Which book was reduced into English by Sir Thomas Malory, knight, as afore is said, and by me divided into 21 books, chaptered and imprinted, and finished in the Abbey Westminster, the last day of July, the year of our Lord, 1485.